Welcome back to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm so pleased to be joined by Mary Zophres, a three-time Oscar nominee whose new film is Damien Chazelle's epic Babylon. Mary, I was doing some research for this, and I think you said there's like 7,000 costumes for this movie, 150 speaking parts. It's completely massive. I guess, where do you even start on the? Where did you even start? How do you even start to even conceptualize how you're going to do 7,000 costumes and at this level that you're at?
I think the approach, I didn't look like in the beginning, I wasn't thinking it was 7,000 because I didn't know the numbers were going to be as big as they were, to be honest with you. But the speaking parts I knew, and actually that it's more like 200 speaking parts. And that I knew was a lot. But the numbers for background, I didn't know until after we got closer to prep. But it was just the way I start all my movies, which is with research and breaking down the script. And that's, but just reading it, it was very much like the watching of the film. Like what Damien wrote was very much, it wasn't like it was a surprise to anyone. So it was just a lot of preparation and research and sort of coming up with a strategy of how to tackle a movie this big. And so some of it was starting before I formally started prepping and kind of resourcing and sending lots of emails to all the vendors that I know that deal with vintage clothing. And I mean, we're talking 6 months out, start a year out. Like if you're out and about, this is the kind of things that I'm going to be looking for. And I feel like it was not only my effort and my crew's effort, it was kind of like a worldwide effort because there were people, there was also vendors in overseas in Europe and vintage and fabric sourcing. And so getting in touch with manufacturers that do woven suitings that are overseas and that I hadn't reached out to in quite some time. And then gathering new resources from, even peers of mine. I was, telling me like, this is a really good company from the UK that has traditional suitings that are very difficult to find elsewhere. And so it was prepping it well in advance, like not just the 12 weeks that we had and strategizing like, okay, I did my breakdown very early. I started doing the research very early. And then we were pushed. And so we were all allowed to have more time to do these kinds of things. And then I feel like having the time to do the amount of research that I did, like I always research, I always break down my script, but like the research and the immersion that was able to take place for me beforehand, I was in it so fully and deeply that there was no like, oh, what am I going to do? I knew exactly what I was going to do on day one. And then it was like on your mark, get set, go. So it was a huge amount of preparation. And just to me, being able to think about the script and about everything that we had to do for such a long time was, it's helpful for me. And I'm kind of used to that because the Coens and Damien, they write their scripts very early. And sometimes you get your scripts like 6 months before you actually have to film. And so you have time to sort of digest it and live with it. And, but it was a big one and it was nonstop. It was just nonstop. You never had a time to like take a breath. It was like, okay, that's done. Now what's next? And so, right. Yeah, but it's a dream job, like this kind of scale. And this, like you said, it is an epic. Like I've never really been given that opportunity. And I can think of, a handful of movies that have been made in the last 10 years that were this way in scope. And I'm talking 10, I'm not talking 20 years, talking basically since streaming began. Like, I just think that it's like a gift that we were given the green light, that we had the support of Paramount, and that, this is the kind of movie that would have gotten greenlit in the old days, like the golden years of Hollywood, and maybe 20 years ago, but not now. And so Damien had this vision and we were able to do it, and it's kind of amazing to me that it's actually there, and you feel it on screen. If it doesn't feel like a CGI, there isn't any CGI.
It's pretty nuts.
You can tell. You can tell.
You can
tell that it's not, these guys haven't been like replicated. And
it's like, I mean, it's really remarkable. I've like every costume, every character has such incredible costumes. The one thing I would just before we go into a little more detail broadly, I just want to ask. I know that Damien, I think, wanted this to feel like, obviously it's a period piece in the era, but also like with the music and everything more modern, right? Like a modern-ish take of that, right? Or not like the same old like period garb that you would see in a typical movie about the 1920s. And so how did that kind of impact what you were kind of creating with these costumes? Because obviously they are, like you said, you're doing a ton of research and it's obviously era appropriate, but you want it to feel like cooler, basically, or newer. I don't even know what the word is, like that.
Well,
kind
I'm
of
glad
thing.
that it feels cooler, and definitely wanted it to feel like something you hadn't seen before. But I mean, the word modern didn't really come into my head while I was doing it. But what Damien, the way he worded it to me, and I think he did to other people, but definitely to me, was when we were gathering the research, like our first meeting, I showed him a picture of Clara Bow, and she was in a baseball uniform sitting on the hood of a car. And that scene, and actually Nellie did wear a baseball jersey in anyway, it's just surprising kind of things that you would not, or photographs and images that you would not ordinarily associate with the 20s. And that was the directive he gave me, was that let's try to find research that when you look at it, that it's from the 20s. You have documented it and certified or whatever. He wanted to be historically accurate, but he wanted to find images and references that were out of the box, that didn't reference like a woman in a cloche. Like that was his thing. He was like, I don't want cloches, not a lot of cloches. And he didn't know that they were called drop waist dresses. I feel like he might have called them like flapper dresses, and which I find to be not the most flattering silhouette in the world. So that was no skin off my back. And we did use some cloches like in crowd scenes. It just sort of gives like the paintbrush, the feel of, a New York City street, but I did not have any of my principals wearing them. And so the directive was to find things from the era that were historically accurate, but that were that didn't seem sort of typically 1920s.
Right.
And in doing so, that it sort of ends up looking I wanted it to be fresh and kind of shocking in many ways, because when my first reaction when I read the script was I was in shock. And so I wanted that to be and in a good way. Like I was like, Damien, like shocked. Shock's probably the wrong word. I was just like, felt like I was, it was a bit naughty and like just bold and decadent. And, and after having done La La Land and First Man, which were the opposite of that, it was like, I had a very positive but visceral reaction. And so I kept on saying to myself, you have to keep that going, because you want that to be on screen, because that's the intention behind the writing of the script. And that's my job, is to interpret the script and create a 3D version of it, or right. Not 3D, like, you know what I'm saying? Like it goes from the paper to the screen, right. Not literally like 3D glasses.
Yeah, no, I knew it. I know what you meant.
And so that's really, that was, so it became like a challenge, like, look at this picture, and it was, it was amazing how much we found. And so it kind of layered back to the script, because his script is based on things that he found in research that we don't really know about as the general public, especially having watched movies made by Hollywood from the 1920s. Mm-hmm. It's a different world, and so that's, I hate, sometimes that's where we get our history, and it's from Hollywood, and Hollywood has kind of painted this portrayal of the time, and it's not necessarily what this movie is talking about, but this movie is based on reality and just a different source, from different sources that he read. And he also, like the first meeting we had, I said, where did you get this? Where is this coming from? And he was like, oh, I'll give you, these are the books that I read where I got, and it was in black and white. And so that's what the directive was. Right. And that's what I was going for. And something very bold. And like I said, to feel what I felt like while watching the movie, to feel what I felt when I was reading the script.
Right. So you have, I mean, like you mentioned Coen Brothers here. You've worked with incredible filmmakers. I was going through your like IMDb and like one of the things, and I don't know if you think about it this way as a costume designer, but when I look at all the movies you've done, I'm like, from the beginning, from your like earliest films, I feel like you have, in my mind, it's like a statement costume or something where I'm like, I could see the costume in my head. Like it sticks with me, like the way you're dressing the characters or whatever. And here, obviously, you have, I would say, I think, again, like all of these costumes are incredible. Nellie's costume in the opening, I feel like, is that it's in like the poster and all these different things. Like you have this like incredible dress that she's in that's very flattering and obviously very functional because it's such an aggressive first 30 minutes. So can you talk a little about like coming up with that statement look for Nellie, that's the first time we're seeing her, and like how you guys discussed how she should look or how you thought she should look, and like how you kind of came up with it basically?
It was a process. It wasn't I knew, like, when I first read the script, my first inclination was that her first costume change would be red. That was my initial instinct. And we even but it was gestational. It developed because we had our first fitting with Margot, and we had this direction that was, she, I think, as a character is daring and audacious and carnal and fiery, and her costumes are not, it was exactly what the definition of what Damien had sort of asked me to do for the whole film, which was like, it's a non-20s version. Like she has sort of more sedate clothes twice in the film for very specific reasons. And so it needed to be bold, and she was going to that party to be discovered. So it was a matter of, in our process of fitting with Margot, we had a fitting about once a week for her 6 weeks of prep. We're starting to rehearse with choreography, and the choreography was also very important in developing the costume, because we had our initial fitting with her, and we're like, oh, let's try this in the dance, because there were a lot of things that we really loved from our first fitting. And as the dance developed, I was like, well, that's not going to work in the dance, because she's going to be surrounded by 200 people or 300 background in that scene. And we found early on, this concept of, and it was actually inspired by a photograph of Anna May Wong, where she has a scarf that's like wrapped around her neck, and that's it, and that's her top, or like that's the top half of the ensemble, and it's a waist-up photograph, so you don't really know what's going on down below. But we loved that very early on as a concept for Nellie, and I made it out of a piece of fabric that was probably maybe 40 inches long by about maybe 20 inches wide. I think it was like a scarf. It's this beautiful silk satin that's got a woven weave that was sent by one of the vendors that I had reached out to a year before. So do you know what I mean? Like if I hadn't talked to that vendor, I never would have found that piece of fabric. Anyway, it's all layered, and it's all like magical that it happened and miraculous in some way. And that's how I felt about this movie, because I'm digressing. We were prepping in the Edith Head building at the Paramount lot, which was like this great mojo that was happening in my own soul. And then, but we were 20 yards, like Damien could come over when he needed to. And we were 200 yards from the choreography studio. The art department was across the lot. Like everybody was in synthesis. And so because I could have that access to the choreography, it informed the costume for that dance number. And it was hard, and it was very, to be honest, it was hard to commit to what that was, because it's the one change that she wears for so long, and just to make sure you get it right, because it's on camera for so long. And with another change, we had sort of created a pattern that was for tap pants that I would, and how I, and that was based off of period correct lingerie that I had, that it sort of has a scalloped leg, or it's not a scalloped leg, but it's a high, it starts and then it kind of comes up higher on the outer thigh. And it's basically underwear from the time period. And but it was red. And so to me, in my mind, she lifted it from a dance troupe that she had in New York. I wanted it to appear like she does. You see her squalor that she's living in the beginning, and it couldn't be too fancy. It needed to be something that looked like she cobbled together. And so then because I felt like she needed to wear shorts of some sort, like she couldn't be in a dress or a skirt. And then with the dance and the movement of the dance, we came up with this idea of the sarong. It's kind of like a piece of vintage China silk that we dyed the same color. And because Margot also told me during these series of many fittings that, you know, she had sort of assigned animals to certain scenes that her character was. And in the party, she said she was an octopus. So then we were like, oh, this sarong is like a tentacle, you know, it's and so it was this organic, collaborative development of her most important costume of the film.
Right.
And I think that but it took us about 6 like she had about 6 outfits that before we landed on this one that we tried, and it was like, this is great, but it's not right for this party. And she ended up wearing some of them later in the film. So it was part of I think, like, I couldn't have done it without Margot. I couldn't have done it without watching the choreography that Mandy Moore did. I couldn't have done it without Damien, who said, you know, like, he loved that top on Margot, and like saying, like, how can we incorporate this into this? And so and also just we never stopped until we found it. And it wasn't like that. It took longer than a minute, that's for sure.
Yeah. But I mean, the time pays off, because it's like, again, like an incredible thing that's like iconic. And I'm like, I think people, when they see us still this 20 years from now, will go, oh yeah, I remember that from Babylon. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. Do you mention like working with Margot there in that capacity? I mean, like, just overall, does that help your process when the actor is like so in tune with the character like that, and like to give you concepts like that about like I mean, that's an interesting thing that she thought of an octopus, because obviously having you saying that, I'm like, I could see that, because she's all movement and arms, and like you said, it's just like a very fluid way she's acting in that scene. So I guess for you, do you like that when the actors are like kind of participating?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was also because we were fitting her, like, but it, you know, her first fitting, she was sort of still in the beginning stages. And so it was, it's very symbiotic. Like, she saw the direction that I was going, and then she could kind of work in her own ideas that she had developed. And yeah, I love that, because it makes, to me, it sort of is a more successful rendition of character. And that's what I love to do, is sort of develop character through costume. And so yes, I welcomed all of her any kind of concept or insight that she had into her character. But we were in sync from the beginning too, which probably helped. Like, she came into her first fitting, and we just had such a great time. And she happens to be incredibly statuette. Like, she just has a great build. I'll be honest. And like, she looks good in so many things that it was so there was an ease to it as well. It wasn't, you could kind of put anything on her and she looks good in it. And that made it a lot more fun.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, that was really, it was, because it's like, I know she went on to do Barbie. It was like having like my Babylon Barbie right in my eye, front of my eyes. Like, she could, you know, it was like, how about this? And she just put it on. Like, there were concepts, like, she was going to wear, we went through there were 3 major things that we had a lot of prototypes for. One was the Wallach party, and one was for when she has a snake fight. And her first outfit for the snake fight looked like she was mud wrestling. And but we ended up going with the overalls, because Damien loved the overalls, and he wanted it to be in a part of the film where we see it a lot. And she ended up loving it, because she called what her animal was for that scene is a badger. And like, she's coming in hot. She's mad at that point. Like, even when she arrives at that party, she's got, like, she's building this, she's aggravated by the sound that's been the advent of sound. And I mean, I don't know if aggravated is the right word or the word she would use, but she's frustrated, I guess. That is apparent. So, and so we built these overalls that had the just exact amount of width from one to the other. And so that, she was, but Damien, and that the idea of an overall without anything underneath came from research. So it's all like, comes full circle. But I loved working with Damien, or working with Margot, and I found I had done so much research and I was so in it that everybody came to their fittings. All the cast came to their fittings and they were very open to all these ideas. And then they shared with me what they were thinking. And it was always very harmonic. There was there wasn't a lot of like Sturm und Drang going on. Everybody was like, this felt right to everybody in their fitting. And that's important to me. Like, you cannot send somebody to camera in something that they don't feel like their character in. I mean, that's like costume design 101. So
yeah, I really could talk to you about this for so long because I love the movie, but we do have to wrap up. But it's an incredible, just incredible costumes, and hearing you discuss them here is really great. Mary Zophres, a 3-time Oscar nominee, whose new film is Damien Chazelle's Babylon, in theaters on December 23rd. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.